Oh yeah, I'm
Trigger happy, yes I'm trigger happy. Better watch out, punk, or I'm gonna have to blow you away.
Hello everyone, and welcome to What Do I Know, the show where I have no idea where this show came from. I only have a passing interest in the Carmen Sandiego franchise, but I was intrigued by the prospects of it getting a modern Netflix show. The angle they were going with was drastically different from the series' other previous iterations, which, from what I understand, got it a bit of a backlash from a couple of fans. Carmen Sandiego is supposed to be a master thief who's so good at what she does, she deliberately leaves clues and hints to wherever her next job is to keep things interesting for her. This version sees her more as a Robin Hood type, stealing only from other criminals and returning the stolen property to its rightful owners. And that's another change. Instead of being the ringleader of Vile, Villains International League of Evil, this iteration has her fighting Vile and trying to bring them down. But none of these changes really bother me that much. Sure, it means the show isn't faithful to the rest of the series, but that's no reason why the show couldn't be any good. It's got an appealing art style, catchy music, and a promising premise. So I went into the show feeling really optimistic about the show's chances. And I came out feeling pretty damn annoyed. Yeah, I've got issues with this show. I don't think I hate it, but there's something about it that was annoying me. An underlying attitude throughout the season that I couldn't really put my finger on. But first, a quick rundown of the plot. A young orphan girl is adopted by a worldwide organization of thieves known as Vile, and is taken to their island headquarters where she's raised by a collection of nannies and teachers that come on and off the island. The vast collection of backgrounds the nannies bring with them give her an extensive education in geography, language, and the various cultures around the world. And since the island where she was raised was an island of thieves, she is naturally brought up to think of thievery as a game. The girl, known by the members of Vile as Black Sheep, soon decides that that's what she wants to do with her life, and asks to be allowed to attend the island's Academy for Thieves. She quickly proves to be one of the best in her class, but ultimately fails to pass her final exam because of one of her teachers, Shadow-san. Black Sheep stows away on her class's first heist, and meets the head of an archaeological dig site who presents her with a new philosophy on the nature of artifacts and their discovery when she expresses an interest in the amount of money the gem that they just dug up would be worth.
Some things possess value other than monetary, young lady. Any historic find such as this gem belongs to everyone. Its theft would rob the world of knowledge, and that would be a true crime.
But then her class arrives, and Black Sheep realizes that their heist is at the archaeological site. They're there to steal the gem that the workers have just unearthed. Amidst all the confusion, the head archaeologist spots Black Sheep with one of her classmates, and comes to the conclusion that she came to the site with them to steal the artifact. In an attempt to leave no witnesses, Gray tries to kill the man, but Black Sheep stops him, and is ultimately captured. Over the next year or so, Black Sheep plots her escape off the island and eventually manages to do so with a hard drive filled with information on Vile and a snazzy red trench coat and hat. Taking up the name Carmen Sandiego, she sets off on a mission to dismantle Vile's organization and bring them down, along with her tech support Player and the twins, Ivy and Zack. Not a very original premise, I'll grant you, but one that has a lot of potential. It's just a shame that it doesn't really live up to that potential. At first I thought the issue was how poorly the show handles its male characters. Pretty much all of the male characters in this show are stupid, evil, or stupidly evil. Only one of them is a protagonist, Zack, and he ain't exactly the brightest bulb around. No, wait, I tell a lie. There's also Detective Chase Debonair, an arrogant Interpol agent, later Acme agent, who serves as a clumsy attempt at comic relief and a caricature of people who don't care to learn about geography and the like. He is constantly belittling and degrading his partner Julia Argent, which, quite apart from being needlessly unpleasant, just makes nearly all of his scenes a slog to get through. Now, one could argue that the show's cavalier attitude with male characters is due to the show being aimed at young women, but I don't really see any evidence for that beyond the fact that the male lead is a woman. It strikes me more as a gender-neutral show, and even if it was geared more towards girls, how does that justify the show's portrayal of men? Most shows directed towards boys have always been able to get along just fine without falling into the opposite trap. I'm not saying they're all innocent, but that still doesn't make it okay. If your idea of having a show that celebrates strong men or women is by making the opposite sex look like idiots, that suggests you're more motivated by degrading one rather than celebrating the strengths of the other, which is not a healthy attitude. But then I realized that that couldn't be the problem. Zack might not be all that bright, but I'd argue that he's more a lovable doof than a complete moron. Most of the ridicule he gets is from his sister, and the more I look at it, the more it comes off as a sort of playful ribbing that you see between siblings. And as insufferable as Devono is for a lot of the show, it is clear pretty much right from the start that the front that he puts on is a front. In the moments where he lets himself be vulnerable, he shows that he has more respect for Argent than he lets on, even mentioning to her that she's the smartest person he knows. A big part of his arc is learning not to be such an ass to Julia and that he needs to ease up on her. I'm kind of hoping that he'll also learn that he needs to stop jumping to conclusions and getting some semblance of a rational mind. And I'd be lying if I said he never got a laugh out of me every now and again.
Why must the elevator date back 2 centuries? Was no one ever in a hurry back then?
Furthermore, claiming that men get a raw deal in this show ignores 2 other important male characters. I won't be talking about one of them because doing so would spoil a twist to the end of the season that I really don't want to spoil because it's actually really damn good, and the other is Carmen's classmate that I mentioned before, Gray, aka Crackle. The guy gets a lot of screen time during the first and second episode, and he's one of the few members of Carmen's class who treats her with any amount of decency before she escapes Vile's base of operations. Granted, when he meets up with Carmen again, he tries to kill her, but not before trying to get her to come back by offering her a deal. He was prepared to kill her, but he didn't really want to. And when he fails to bring Carmen in, Vile wipes his memory and dumps him back in Sydney, Australia. Later, he meets up with Carmen again, and having had Vile's influence stripped from his mind, he proves to be one of the kindest persons you'll ever meet. He's polite, firm but gentle, and unlike Zack, he's not an idiot. He's just a little naive. Unfortunately, he's no longer relevant as of episode 6, but I'm kind of hoping that they bring him back in later seasons. I'd be interested in seeing him take down Vile with Carmen. And that's not even mentioning Player. The kid has practically no character, I doubt he'll ever get anything resembling an arc, and the way he talks, I get the impression that he's supposed to be an audience insert. If nothing else, the name is a dead giveaway. But he's still a perfectly fine kid. So it's a potential problem, but as far as I'm concerned, the evidence is inconclusive. So then I thought maybe it's the clumsy way the show incorporates its educational element. The Carmen Sandiego franchise has always been about teaching geography and trivia, and this show didn't want to drop that element. Which is fine in theory, but the problem is that they did it by dedicating a few minutes of each episode to a glorified PowerPoint presentation by both Player and Carmen, listing off a bunch of facts about wherever the episode happens to take place. Now, sometimes the information exposited is important to the story, so the interesting facts section of the episode doubles as an exposition dump. Episode 3, for example, takes place in Indonesia, and the educational portion talks about the vast amounts of rice the country grows every year, the number of islands that the country is composed of, the Komodo dragons that are found on a select few of the islands, and the durian fruits that are commonly grown throughout the country. Problem is, only the rice is relevant to the story. Episode 3 sees Carmen, Zack, and Ivy foil a plot by Vile operative Tigress to destroy Indonesia's rice crops. The only time durians are ever brought up again is when one smacks against the windshield of Zack's car during a chase scene, and the fact that the country is comprised of hundreds of islands never comes up again. And the Komodo dragons? They barely get a passing mention in the episode.
Something tells me that was no Komodo dragon.
Every episode has this problem. It crams as many interesting facts as it can in its exposition dump, but barely any of it actually serves a purpose in the story. And hell, in some cases, the episode itself renders the educational segment even more pointless than it already is. Episode 6, for example, takes place in the outback of Australia. The educational segment talks about the immense size of the outback, gives a few examples of the animals that can be found there, makes a point of mentioning the rock formation known as Ayers Rock, and the formation's importance to the Aboriginal people of Australia. And literally, the very next scene reestablishes all of that.
Kangaroo, crocodile, koalas, dingoes? The ground it occupies has been home to my people for at least 22,000 years.
And once again, only Ayers Rock is actually important to the story. I'm not against this show being educational, quite the contrary. But if the writers want the show to be more engaging, they need to drop the pointless exposition dump and find ways to incorporate the bits of trivia into the story itself. Not only will it make for better storytelling, it'll serve as a more effective way of teaching. Going back to episode 3, you can include a scene where Carmen needs to escape from a Komodo dragon, write in a scene where she has to figure out where Tigress is across the various islands of Indonesia, and include a scene where Carmen buys Zack a durian because she and Ivy are tired of hearing him complain about how hungry he is. This way, the show is showing you all the bits of trivia pertaining to those places. You can get away with telling us where these places are, but show us what's so interesting about them. Don't just dedicate a few minutes of each episode telling us about it. But while this is certainly a problem with the show's writing, it still wasn't what was bothering me. It was certainly part of it, but my issue had to do with the show's tone itself, not just the sloppy exposition. It wasn't until I was rewatching episode 5 that I finally figured out what was bothering me. In this episode, Carmen, Zack, and Ivy are infiltrating an auction of stolen paintings organized by Vile. Zack is tasked with playing the part of a duke so that he can be taken to where the auction is being held, with Carmen and Ivy following them. Zack has to maintain his cover at the auction while Ivy and Carmen enter the vault and swipe all the paintings. While eating dinner with the other guests, caviar is served, and Zack is hesitant to eat it because he hates seafood. He doesn't have to in the end thanks to Devino busting into the room before he can take the first bite, but look how they play up Zack having to eat this stuff. The whole scene plays like he's about to eat something that he's allergic to. But he's not allergic, he just hates seafood. Zack comes off as a selfish asshole who's unwilling to partake in food he doesn't like to serve the mission. If they made it so he was allergic to seafood, the scene would be significantly more tense, and his hesitancy to eat it would be far more reasonable. Wait, couldn't he just explain to the other guests that he was allergic to seafood and avoid the tension completely in that scenario? Okay, then have Zack mention his love of seafood as part of his cover story in an earlier scene. That way the tension is both set up and earned. The only reason I can think of for why they'd go with Zack simply hating seafood would be because children are more likely to understand being unwilling to eat something because it's disgusting than they are to understand being unwilling to eat something because of an allergy. And that's when I realized what was bothering me so much about this show. It has no respect for its audience. The show is loaded with so many instances of having no confidence in its target demographic's ability to handle serious moments or having no trust in their ability to understand what's going on, so they dumb down a ton of plot points and take the time to explain things that don't actually need explaining. Going back to episode 3, the show makes it clear that Vile's motive for destroying Indonesia's rice crops is so they can sell the country their brand of rice. Now, you would think that that would be enough for a child to understand why they need to be stopped. But then they add this.
They tried to feed it to us back on the island, but Vile doesn't even begin to describe how bad it was.
Why was it necessary to add the fact that the rice was disgusting? Isn't the fact that they're forcing a situation where the country needs to buy rice to keep its inhabitants from starving bad enough on its own? Apparently not, since we need to add the fact that the food is yucky for the children to understand why the bad guys need to be stopped. Oh no, the bad guys are gonna ruin all the good guys' yummy rice and force them to eat yucky rice. One of the worst examples of this comes from the very first episode, and I'm honestly amazed that I missed it during my first viewing. During one of the final exams, Shadow-san tasks each member of the class with finding a single dollar bill in his coat and getting it out within the time limit. Tigress cheats by using her X-ray goggles to find the bill and cutting the coat to get the bill out.
Shadow-san is so gonna call foul.
Unorthodox technique, but excellent results.
No way! Shadow-san is totally playing favorites!
Why was it necessary to have Carmen explain that Shadow-san was playing favorites? Shadow-san is clearly established earlier in the episode to be one of the tougher teachers in the school, and the only teacher who doesn't think Carmen should even be attending due to her age. All we need is Carmen calling Shadow-san putting the smackdown on Tigress for her technique, and her being surprised and or visibly angry when he doesn't. The fact that he's playing favorites doesn't need to be explained to us. It's shown to us via the establishment of his hostile relationship with Carmen in previous scenes, and his praise for Tigress' final solution. Yet they feel the need to explain it anyway. Why? Because the show doesn't trust its target demographic to understand what's going on. And there are very few things that I hate more than a show that talks down to its audience. But the funny thing about all of this is that while the show clearly doesn't respect its audience, I actually think it really wants to at the same time. In episode 7, Carmen goes to the city of Mumbai to prevent Vile operative Paper Star from stealing the Magna Carta. Now, the thing about Vile operatives in this show is that they all have a specific gimmick. Tigress is basically Catwoman, Crackle specializes in electricity, El Topo is all about tunneling, Leshev is a huge Obi-Wan fan, and Mime Bomb is, well, a mime. Paper Star's shtick is that she fashions bits of paper into throwing stars or daggers and throws them at her enemies. Now, they play up Paper Star like she's this huge, creepy threat. She skips around, she sings a little song, she hides in the shadows, she's basically your stereotypical creepy schoolgirl. The only problem is that her main method of attack is throwing bits of paper at you. Writers, why do you think paper is scary? Paper is not scary. Why are you trying to make paper scary? Oh, and there's nothing special about the paper either. It's not like futuristic paper or high-tech paper with super sharp edges or magic paper or anything like that. It's just regular old paper. I know this because when she runs out of ammo, she starts using the paper out of leaflets and newspapers and shit, with no difference between the paper she carries around with her and the bits of paper that she finds lying around. Paper throwing stars are a real thing, but they're not sharp enough to cut into human skin. You're more likely to wound yourself with a pencil, and it's only the tips of the stars that are actually pointy. Yet the stuff Paper Star is making is sharp enough to cut the front end of Carmen's hat clean off. This sort of gimmick is more well suited to a goofy villain that you're not supposed to take seriously, like half the Rogues Gallery from Darkwing Duck. But they play her up like she's this universe's version of Azula, and it'd be pretty darn effective too, if not for the fact that any sense of fright is completely eclipsed by this sense of hilarity over the fact that she's throwing bits of paper at our heroine! Why do you think paper is scary? And this is what I mean by the show wanting to respect its audience but simply failing to do so. It's like the writers want to trust kids to be able to handle something serious, but they can't help but make it silly or over-explain it or dumb it down. And it really doesn't have to dumb down anything. It can handle mature themes just fine. Remember how I mentioned how Gray is no longer relevant as of episode 6? Well, the reason he's no longer relevant is because Carmen initially wants to re-establish a connection with him now that he's no longer a Vile operative, but ultimately decides not to in order to keep him safe. She worries that associating with him will put him back in Vile's crosshairs, and she doesn't want Vile to hurt him to get to her. It's a surprisingly mature note to end the episode on. And an even more impressive bit of writing? During the final episode, Carmen comes face to face with Coach Brunt, the combat specialist at Vile Academy, and mother figure to Carmen for most of her life. And she beats the shit out of Carmen, nearly crushing her to death before— No spoilers! Think about that. The same show that has the main character's mother figure nearly crushing her to death also has— This show has a lot of kinks to work out. It has a fun, if unoriginal, premise, the characters are at least passable, the animation and music are really appealing, although the art style doesn't really lend itself particularly well to the more emotional scenes, and the stories are pretty good on paper. But there needs to be a serious overhaul in the writing department. I like a lot of the things they're doing with the characters, the good ones anyway, but it needs to stop talking down to its audience, and the educational portion of the episode should be incorporated into the stories themselves, and not dumped in a glorified PowerPoint presentation in the middle of the episode. Quite apart from having no connection to the rest of the story whatsoever, it's just a bad way of delivering exposition. But I've never handled exposition in a story before, so what do I know? I'm Officer Trigger Happy, and seriously, why did they try to make paper scary?
We're done here!
Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed the review. Sorry I wasn't more active during the summer. Real life comes up on you real fast, and with school starting up again, I'll likely not be able to pick up the pace with content. Plus, I might be editing for someone else in the near future, so we'll see how that goes. But I'm not about to let any of that stop me. I've got a review for the first Equestria Girls movie in the works, but I'm having trouble deciding what I want to do after that. So I thought I'd let you guys decide. Would you like to see a video on Chancellor Naysay and his political philosophy? Yes, seriously. Or a video on putting your hoof down and why I personally love it. I will be doing both eventually, but you guys get to decide which one you want to see more. Polls in the upper right hand corner, looking forward to see what you pick.